The buzz inside the airplane cabin was as lively as a bustling city street. A symphony of clinking coffee cups, rustling carry-ons, and the soft hum of first-class luxury settling into the air. Businessmen in crisp suits adjusted their ties, their eyes darting between laptops and watches, while families wrestled with overstuffed bags, coaxing children to settle into their seats. Overhead bins snapped shut, and the faint scent of jet fuel mingled with the aroma of fresh-brewed coffee from the galley. Among the passengers was John Kennedy, the seasoned senator from Louisiana, his warm smile and easy charm belying the weight of his years in public service. Tall, silver-haired, and unassuming, he settled into his plush first-class seat by the window, flipping through the in-flight magazine with a quiet curiosity. Suddenly, a ripple of excitement swept through the cabin like a summer breeze. Heads turned, whispers buzzed, and eyes widened. "It's Karoline Leavitt," someone murmured the name, sparking recognition. The young woman known as the youngest White House press secretary in history stepped into the cabin, her poised demeanor and sharp eyes commanding attention without effort. Yet there was a hint of fatigue in her posture, the kind that comes from carrying the weight of a nation's questions on her shoulder. Kennedy glanced up, his curiosity piqued. Karoline, in her mid-20s, moved with the confidence of someone who had faced press rooms and political firestorms, but her expression softened as she scanned the cabin searching for her seat. The flight attendant, flustered, approached her with an apologetic frown. "Ms. Leavitt." "I'm so sorry, there's been a mix-up with the seating," she said, her voice low but urgent. "First class is fully booked, and we'll need to move you to economy." A murmur of surprise rippled through the nearby passengers. Karoline nodded, her face composed, though a flicker of disappointment crossed her eyes. She adjusted her bag and prepared to head toward the back of the plane. But before she could take another step, Kennedy rose from his seat, his movements deliberate, yet kind. "Ms. Leavitt," he said, his southern drawl warm and steady. "Please, take my seat. I insist." The cabin seemed to hold its breath. Karoline paused, her sharp gaze meeting his, studying the sincerity in his weathered face. "Senator Kennedy, that's very kind, but I couldn't possibly," she began, but he waved a hand gently, his smile disarming. "Nonsense. You've got a tough job keeping the press in line. You deserve a moment of comfort." Karoline hesitated, her lips parting as if to protest again, but something in Kennedy's earnest expression stopped her. "Thank you," she said softly, her voice carrying a note of gratitude that felt rare in her world of rapid-fire briefings. Kennedy tipped an imaginary hat, a gesture both old-fashioned and charming, and gathered his belongings. "It's no trouble at all," he replied, his eyes twinkling with a warmth that put her at ease. As he made his way toward the economy section, passengers exchanged glances, their whispers growing louder. "That's John Kennedy," one said. "The senator." Giving up his seat like that, another marveled. Even the flight attendants, accustomed to the chaos of boarding, paused to watch their expressions, a mix of surprise and admiration. Karoline settled into the first-class seat, her hands smoothing the armrests as she glanced out the window, a faint smile tugging at her lips. The gesture had caught her off guard, a rare moment of kindness in a world often defined by competition and calculation. Back in economy, Kennedy squeezed into a middle seat, his tall frame slightly cramped between a chatty college student and a weary mother cradling a restless toddler. The air here was thicker, filled with the hum of conversation and the occasional cry of a child. He didn't seem to mind. Popping in his earbuds, he leaned back, his thoughts drifting to the young woman now sitting in his place. Karoline Leavitt, he mused, was a force, a young trailblazer, navigating the high-stakes world of Washington with a poise that belied her age. He'd seen her on television fielding questions with a sharpness that reminded him of his own early days in politics when every word was a tightrope walk. Yet there was something else about her, a spark of idealism that hadn't been dimmed by the grind of her role. Kennedy chuckled softly to himself, adjusting his glasses. He'd always believed in the power of small gestures, the kind that could shift the course of a day, or perhaps something more. The plane taxied down the runway, the engines roaring to life as the cabin lights dimmed. Passengers settled in their conversations, fading into a low hum. Kennedy glanced around, noting the mix of faces, some anxious, some bored, others lost in their own worlds. The college student beside him was typing furiously on a laptop, muttering about a deadline, while the toddler's mother whispered soothing words, her patience a quiet kind of heroism. Kennedy's thoughts were interrupted by a sudden jolt, the plane lurching slightly as it climbed through the clouds. The seatbelt sign flickered on, and a tense murmur spread through the cabin. Just a bit of turbulence, the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, calm but firm. "Please remain seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." The plane shuddered again, harder this time, and drinks spilled from trays, splashing onto laps. Overhead bins rattled ominously, and the toddler beside Kennedy let out a piercing wail. The mother's face tightened, her hands trembling as she tried to soothe her child. In first class, Karoline gripped the armrests, her knuckles whitening. She wasn't prone to fear, but the intensity of the turbulence sent a shiver through her. She glanced out the window where dark clouds churned, illuminated by flashes of lightning. Her mind raced not to the press briefings or the endless emails awaiting her, but to the man who had given up his seat. Kennedy's gesture lingered in her thoughts, a small act that felt like an anchor in the chaos of the moment. She wondered how he was faring in the back, surrounded by the noise and cramped quarters of economy. The plane jolted again, and a collective gasp rose from the passengers. Karoline closed her eyes, focusing on her breathing, her fingers still clutching the armrests. She'd faced tough crowds and tougher questions, but this was different. A reminder of how little control anyone had when nature took the reins. Back in economy, Kennedy remained calm, his steady presence a contrast to the growing unease around him. The college student had abandoned his laptop, his face pale as he gripped his seat. First time flying through a storm, Kennedy asked, his voice low and reassuring. The young man nodded, swallowing hard. "It's like a Louisiana thunderstorm," Kennedy said with a grin. "Loud and wild, but it'll pass." The student managed a weak smile, and Kennedy's words seemed to ease the tension, if only for a moment. He turned to the mother beside him, offering a gentle nod. "You're doing great," he said softly, and she returned a grateful look, her shoulders relaxing slightly. The turbulence intensified, the plane dipping and swaying as if caught in a giant's hands. Passengers murmured prayers, their voices barely audible over the creaking of the aircraft. Kennedy's thoughts drifted back to Karoline, wondering how she was holding up. He'd seen her strength on the national stage, but storms like this tested everyone, no matter their title. As the plane rocked, Kennedy and Karoline, though separated by the cabin's divide, were united by the shared experience of the moment. His act of kindness had set something in motion, a ripple that was already spreading through the cabin. Passengers who had witnessed the exchange began to soften their own small acts of generosity, emerging a woman sharing her water with a nervous neighbor, a man offering his jacket to a shivering child. The cabin, though rattled by the storm, began to hum with a quiet warmth, a sense of connection born from Kennedy's simple gesture. He leaned back in his seat, his eyes catching the flicker of lightning outside the window. Something told him this wasn't just a flight. It was the beginning of something extraordinary. The turbulence began to ease, the plane leveling out as the storm's grip loosened. The seatbelt sign remained on, but the collective tension in the cabin softened, replaced by sighs of relief and tentative smiles. Kennedy glanced at the college student, who was now typing again, his nerves settling. The toddler had fallen asleep, nestled against her mother, who mouthed a quiet "thank you" to Kennedy. He nodded, his heart warmed by the small exchange. In first class, Karoline exhaled, her grip on the armrests loosening. She glanced at the empty seat beside her, where Kennedy would have been, and felt a pang of gratitude. His gesture wasn't just about a seat. It was about seeing her not as the White House press secretary, but as a person navigating a demanding world. She pulled out her notebook, a habit from her days in communications, and jotted down a thought. Kindness is a choice that changes everything. As the plane steadied, Kennedy found himself reflecting on the young woman he'd met. Karoline Leavitt was more than a title or a headline. She was someone striving to make a difference, just as he had all those years ago when he first stepped into public service. Their brief conversation had revealed her passion, her drive to use her platform for good. He wondered what she might do with a moment of unexpected kindness, how it might ripple outward. The flight attendants, now moving through the aisles to check on passengers, caught Kennedy's eye. One of them smiled, whispering, "That was a class act, Senator." He shrugged, his modesty genuine. Just doing what felt right, he said, but his mind was already turning to something bigger. He thought of the challenges Karoline faced, the weight of her role, and the potential for their paths to cross again in a way that could inspire others. The cabin lights brightened, and the pilot's voice returned, calmer now. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've passed through the worst of the turbulence. We should have smooth skies for the rest of the flight." A ripple of applause broke out, and Kennedy joined in his clap, steady and deliberate. He glanced toward the front of the plane, imagining Karoline in his seat, perhaps looking out at the same clouds he could see from his window. The storm had shaken them all, but it had also brought them together, if only for a moment. Kennedy felt a spark of possibility, a sense that this flight was more than a journey from one city to another. It was a chance to start something new, something that could remind people of the power of a single act of kindness. As the plane cruised through the now calm skies, he knew this was only the beginning. A story that would unfold far beyond the confines of the cabin, carried forward by two people whose lives had just become unexpectedly intertwined. The roar of the storm outside the airplane was a living thing, a relentless beast, clawing at the fuselage as the cabin shuddered under its weight. Lightning flashed through the windows, casting jagged shadows across the faces of passengers, their eyes wide with unease. The hum of first-class luxury had vanished, replaced by the tense creak of seats and the muffled gasps of those clutching armrests. In economy, John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, sat wedged between a pale college student and a mother soothing her crying toddler. His calm demeanor, a stark contrast to the chaos around him. His silver hair caught the dim cabin light, and his steady gaze seemed to anchor the space even as the plane lurched through the turbulent skies. The seatbelt sign glowed an insistent amber, and the pilot's voice crackled over the intercom, steady but taut. "Folks, we're hitting some rough weather. Please stay seated and keep your seatbelts fastened." The words did little to ease the growing panic as drinks tipped over and overhead bins rattled like loose bones. Kennedy's thoughts drifted to Karoline Leavitt, the young White House press secretary, now sitting in his first-class seat, wondering how she was faring in the storm's grip. The plane dipped sharply, eliciting a chorus of startled cries. Kennedy's hands rested lightly on his armrests, his composure unshaken, though his sharp eyes scanned the cabin with a quiet vigilance. He'd faced storms before, both in the skies and in the halls of Congress, but this one felt different, more primal, as if the heavens themselves were testing the resolve of everyone aboard. The college student beside him, his laptop long forgotten, gripped his seat with white-knuckled intensity. "This is bad, isn't it?" he muttered, his voice barely audible over the howling wind outside. Kennedy turned to him, his southern drawl warm and grounding. "Son, it's just nature reminding us who's in charge. We'll get through it." The young man managed a shaky nod, his fear easing slightly under Kennedy's steady gaze. The mother on his other side rocked her toddler, whose wails had grown louder, piercing the cabin's tense air. Kennedy leaned toward her, his voice soft but clear. "You're doing a fine job, ma'am. That little one's lucky to have you." Her tired eyes met his, and a small grateful smile flickered across her face, a fleeting moment of connection amidst the storm. In first class, Karoline Leavitt sat rigid, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. The plush seat, a gift from Kennedy's kindness, felt like a small island in the chaos. Lightning illuminated the clouds outside her window, each flash a reminder of how fragile this journey was. She'd faced tough crowds in press briefings, dodging questions with the precision of a fencer. But this was different. No words could tame the storm. Her mind kept returning to Kennedy, the man who'd given up his comfort without a second thought. His gesture had been a rare spark of humanity in her high-stakes world, and now, as the plane rocked, she wondered how he was holding up in the cramped economy cabin. The turbulence hit harder, the plane swaying like a ship in rough seas. A tray of drinks clattered to the floor, and a woman across the aisle let out a stifled sob. Karoline's heart raced, but she closed her eyes, drawing on the resilience that had carried her through countless challenges. She thought of Kennedy's easy smile, his unassuming kindness, and felt a strange calm settle over her. Back in economy, Kennedy sensed the mounting fear around him. The college student was now muttering under his breath, his hands trembling while the toddler's cries had escalated into a desperate wail. Kennedy reached into his jacket pocket, pulling out a small packet of crackers he'd saved from the in-flight service. "Mind if I try?" he asked the mother, his tone gentle. She nodded, her exhaustion evident. Kennedy leaned toward the toddler, his voice low and soothing, like a grandfather telling a bedtime story. "Hey there, little one. How about a cracker? Bet it tastes better than all this noise." The child's cries softened to a sniffle, her wide eyes fixed on the cracker as she reached for it. The mother exhaled, her shoulders relaxing, and whispered, "Thank you, Senator." Kennedy waved off the gratitude, his focus already shifting to the student. "Tell me about that paper you're working on," he said, redirecting the young man's attention. The distraction worked. The student began rambling about his research, his voice steadying as he spoke. The plane lurched again, a violent jolt that sent a briefcase sliding down the aisle. Gasps rippled through the cabin, and Kennedy's sharp eyes caught a movement near the front of economy, an elderly man, his face pale, struggling to secure his oxygen mask. Without hesitation, Kennedy unbuckled his seatbelt, ignoring the glowing sign above. He moved swiftly, steadying himself against the seats as he reached the man. "Let me help you, sir," he said, his hands gentle but firm as he adjusted the mask. The man's eyes, clouded with fear, softened with gratitude. "Bless you," he whispered, his voice frail. Kennedy nodded, returning to his seat as a flight attendant hurried over her expression, a mix of concern and admiration. "Senator, you shouldn't be up," she said, but her tone held no reprimand. Kennedy just smiled. Couldn't leave him struggling. The moment didn't go unnoticed. Passengers nearby watched their own fears momentarily forgotten, inspired by the quiet courage of a man who didn't hesitate to act. Karoline in first class felt the plane's shuddering ease for a moment, but the storm's intensity lingered in the air. She glanced at the empty seat beside her, imagining Kennedy navigating the chaos of economy. Her role as press secretary had taught her to stay composed under pressure, but this storm was a different beast, one that stripped away titles and exposed raw humanity. She thought of Kennedy's stories, shared during their brief exchange before the storm hit, tales of his early days in Louisiana, navigating politics with a mix of humor and grit. "You've got to find the heart of things," he'd said, his eyes crinkling with a wisdom that felt timeless. Those words echoed now, grounding her as the plane rocked. She pulled out her notebook, scribbling a quick note. Find the heart, even in the storm. It was a reminder to herself, but also a spark of something bigger, an idea that maybe, just maybe, she and Kennedy could turn this moment into something meaningful. The turbulence surged again, the plane dipping with a force that made hearts skip. In economy, Kennedy braced himself, his hands steady on the armrests. He glanced at the college student, now silent, his eyes fixed on the window where lightning danced. "You know," Kennedy said, his voice cutting through the tension, "I once got stuck in a hurricane down in Baton Rouge. Thought the world was ending, but it passed. Always does." The student chuckled, a small release of nervous energy, and the mother beside him joined in her laughter, soft but genuine. Kennedy's stories, simple yet vivid, wove a thread of calm through the cabin. He thought of Karoline again, wondering how she was holding up. He'd seen her strength in their brief talk, her passion for using her platform to make a difference. She'd mentioned a dream, a project to inspire young people through community action, but had dismissed it as a long shot. Kennedy's mind turned, the seeds of an idea taking root. Maybe this flight, this storm, was a chance to help her dream take flight. The plane's shaking began to subside, the storm's fury giving way to a fragile calm. The seatbelt sign remained on, but the cabin exhaled collectively, the worst of the ordeal seemingly behind them. Kennedy leaned back, his thoughts racing. He'd always believed in the power of small acts, the kind that could ripple outward and change lives. His gesture of giving up his seat had been instinctive, but the connection he'd felt with Karoline, however brief, was something else, a spark of potential. He glanced at the passengers around him, their faces softening as the plane steadied. The college student was typing again, his fear replaced by focus. The toddler slept, her tiny hand still clutching the cracker. The mother caught Kennedy's eye, mouthing, "You're a good man." He shook his head, his modesty genuine. "Just trying to keep up with folks like you," he replied, his voice warm. In first class, Karoline felt the tension in her shoulders ease as the plane leveled out. She looked out at the clouds, now less menacing, their edges glowing with the promise of clearer skies. Kennedy's kindness had been a lifeline, not just in giving her a seat, but in reminding her of the human side of her work. She'd spent so much time in the spotlight, fielding questions and shaping narratives, that she'd almost forgotten the power of simple connection. She thought of their conversation, his easy humor and quiet wisdom. "You've got a gift for making people listen," he'd told her, his tone earnest. "Use it for something that matters." Those words lingered, stirring an idea she hadn't dared to voice before, a project to inspire kindness, to show the world that even in divisive times, humanity could prevail. She jotted another note in her notebook. Pay it forward. As the plane cruised through calmer skies, Kennedy felt a shift in the cabin's energy. Passengers began to relax their conversations, picking up their smiles, tentative but real. The flight attendants moved through the aisles, checking on everyone with renewed warmth. One of them paused by Kennedy's seat, leaning in. "That was something special, Senator," she said, her voice low. "What you did for Ms. Leavitt, and just now with that gentleman." Kennedy shrugged, his eyes crinkling. "Just doing what I'd hoped someone would do for me." but his mind was already elsewhere, turning over the possibility of something bigger. He thought of Karoline's dream, her passion for change. He knew the challenges she faced. Her role as press secretary was a crucible one that demanded resilience and heart. Maybe he thought they could work together, turn this moment into a movement. The pilot's voice returned, smooth and reassuring. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've cleared the storm. We expect smooth skies for the rest of the flight." A ripple of applause broke out, and Kennedy joined in his clap, steady and deliberate. He glanced toward the front of the plane, imagining Karoline in his seat, perhaps feeling the same relief he did. The storm had tested them all, but it had also forged something, a connection, a shared purpose. Kennedy knew this wasn't just a flight. It was the start of something extraordinary, a chance to show the world that kindness could be a catalyst for change. As the plane soared through the now quiet skies, he felt a spark of hope, a belief that he and Karoline could turn their fleeting encounter into a legacy that would ripple far beyond the clouds. The pulse of the community center thrummed like a heartbeat, its modest walls alive with the chatter of volunteers and the rustle of hope taking shape. Tables lined with colorful wristbands and steaming coffee urns filled the space, while sunlight streamed through open windows, casting a warm glow over faces bright with purpose. The air buzzed with the energy of a movement in its infancy, one sparked by a single act of kindness on a storm-tossed flight. John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, stood at the heart of it all, his silver hair catching the light as his warm drawl wove through the crowd, greeting each person with a nod and a story that felt like home. Beside him, Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, moved with quiet confidence, her sharp eyes scanning the room as she adjusted a stack of flyers stamped with the words, "Pay it forward." The chaos of that flight, with its rattling bins and flickering lights, felt like a lifetime ago, but its ripples had carried them here to a moment brimming with possibility. Kennedy's decision to give up his first-class seat for Karoline had been more than a gesture. It had been a spark igniting a shared vision that now filled this room. In the weeks since, their fleeting connection had deepened into a partnership fueled by a belief that small acts of kindness could ripple outward, changing lives. The Pay It Forward initiative was their answer, a call for people to do one selfless act: buy a stranger's meal, help a neighbor, offer a smile, and inspire others to follow. The community center, humble but electric, was the stage for their first major event, a launch to rally support and spread the word. Kennedy's easy charm drew people in his stories of Louisiana life, tales of fishing trips, and small-town generosity, eliciting laughter and nods. Karoline, with her knack for communication, spoke to a local reporter, her voice steady and clear. "It's about showing that kindness isn't just a moment. It's a movement." She said, her words echoing the conviction she'd felt since that turbulent flight. The initiative had gained traction faster than either had expected. Kennedy had leaned on his Louisiana roots, calling old friends to secure donations, coffee banners. Even the wristbands were gifts from businesses moved by the story of the flight. Karoline, wielding her White House platform, had pitched the idea to media outlets, her press briefings now sprinkled with mentions of "Pay It Forward." Social media lit up with "Pay It Forward" posts, some from passengers on that flight, who shared how Kennedy's calm and Karoline's grace had inspired them. The center was packed with volunteers of all ages, students, parents, retirees, eager to join. A young woman handed out wristbands, her voice bright, as she explained, "Wear this, do something kind, and tell someone to do the same." Kennedy overheard his eyes crinkling with a smile. "That's how it starts," he said, his drawl warm. Karoline caught his glance, her nod a silent affirmation of their shared mission. Challenges had tested their resolve. Some dismissed the initiative as overly simplistic, arguing that kindness couldn't solve deep-rooted problems. A radio host had called it a nice idea, but unrealistic, and Karoline had felt a sting of doubt reading the critique. Kennedy, unfazed, had sipped his coffee and said, "Folks always question what's new. We just keep going." His optimism was infectious, and they pushed forward, fueled by stories pouring in from early supporters. At the event, a teacher shared how her students had started a kindness chain, leaving notes of encouragement in lockers. A truck driver spoke of paying for a stranger's toll, inspired by a tweet about the flight. "If a senator can give up his seat, I can spare a few bucks," he said, his voice gruff but earnest. The crowd clapped, and Kennedy joined in, his heart swelling. This was what he'd hoped for, a movement that felt human, not political. Karoline took the stage, her presence a blend of poise and passion. "This started with one act," she said, glancing at Kennedy, who waved off the attention with a grin. "Senator Kennedy showed me that kindness is a choice we can all make, no matter who we are. We're asking you to make that choice today." The room hummed with agreement, the energy almost tangible. Kennedy followed, his voice steady, as he shared a memory of a mentor who'd taught him the value of small gestures. "One kind word can change a day, maybe a life." He said, his words simple, but heavy with truth. The crowd leaned in their faces, reflecting a shared hope. Karoline watched her notebook tucked under her arm, already planning the next steps. More events, a website, a way to scale the movement. She thought of the flight of Kennedy's calm in the storm and felt a surge of gratitude for the man who'd turned a seat into a symbol. The event caught the eye of a documentary crew drawn by the story's viral spread. They approached Karoline cameras, ready, asking to chronicle the initiative. "This could reach millions," the producer said, her excitement palpable. Karoline hesitated, then looked at Kennedy, who nodded. "Let's show 'em what kindness can do," he said, his voice firm. The crew began filming, capturing volunteers, sharing stories. A barista who'd given free coffee to a struggling customer, a kid who'd helped an elderly neighbor with groceries. Each tale was a thread in a growing tapestry, proof that the movement was taking root. Kennedy listened to a young couple describe how they'd donated clothes to a shelter inspired by the initiative. "You're making us all proud," he told them, his sincerity unmistakable. Karoline jotted a note. "Kindness is a story we all write together." She felt the weight of the moment, the realization that this was bigger than either of them. As the event ended, the center glowed with a warmth that lingered like a summer evening. Volunteers exchanged hugs and phone numbers, their wristbands a promise to keep the movement alive. Kennedy and Karoline stood together, watching the crowd thin, their shared vision now a reality. "Think we're on to something?" Karoline asked, her voice soft but hopeful. Kennedy's eyes twinkled. "Darlin', we're just getting started." The documentary crew packed up their footage, a collection of moments that would soon reach far beyond this room. As they stepped outside, the city's hum greeted them, a reminder of the world waiting for their message. Kennedy glanced at the wristband on his wrist, a quiet symbol of the journey they'd begun. Karoline felt it too, a spark of possibility, a belief that their work could change lives one act at a time. The ripples of their kindness were spreading, and the story was far from over. The glow of the theater lights dimmed, casting a hushed reverence over the packed auditorium, where anticipation hung like a held breath. The screen flickered to life, and the opening scenes of the documentary, Pay It Forward, filled the space, each frame pulsing with the raw, unpolished beauty of human kindness. The audience, celebrities, community leaders, everyday folks, sat captivated, their faces reflecting the soft light as stories of generosity unfolded. John Kennedy, the senator from Louisiana, sat near the front, his silver hair catching the faint glow, his warm smile, a quiet anchor in the sea of emotion. Beside him, Karoline Leavitt, the youngest White House press secretary in history, clasped her hands, her sharp eyes glistening with pride and nerves. The journey that began with a single act of kindness on a turbulent flight had led them here to a premiere that felt like the culmination of a dream, yet also the spark of something far greater. The documentary wove together stories born from their Pay It Forward initiative, each one a testament to the power of small acts. A teacher in Ohio had started a kindness club inspired by a wristband from their first event. A firefighter in Texas had paid for a family's groceries, his quiet nod echoing Kennedy's gesture on the plane. The film captured the ripple effect, showing how one act, Kennedy giving up his first-class seat for Karoline, had inspired thousands. The audience laughed at moments of joy like a child leaving flowers on a neighbor's porch, and wiped tears at scenes of reconciliation like a father and son reuniting after years apart. Kennedy's steady presence anchored the film, his southern drawl narrating moments of the flight with humor and heart. Karoline's voice, sharp yet warm, spoke of hope, her words a call to action that resonated deeply. As the credits rolled, the theater erupted in applause, the sound swelling like a wave, and Kennedy reached over, giving Karoline's shoulder a gentle squeeze. "We did good," he whispered, his eyes crinkling. The film's impact was immediate, spreading far beyond the auditorium's walls. Social media lit up with #PayItForward as viewers shared their own stories of kindness, a barista covering a customer's coffee, a teenager shoveling snow for an elderly neighbor. Schools adopted the film's message, incorporating it into lessons on empathy, while businesses hosted Pay It Forward days, encouraging employees to perform small acts of generosity. Karoline's inbox overflowed with letters, each one a story of transformation. One from a single mother described how a stranger had paid her electric bill, inspired by the documentary. "I'm paying it forward now," she wrote, "because you and the senator showed me. It matters." Karoline read the letter aloud to Kennedy over coffee, her voice catching. He listened, his face softening, and said, "That's the heart of it, darlin'. It's not about us. It's about them." His words echoed the wisdom he'd shared on the flight, a reminder that kindness was a legacy anyone could leave. Challenges had tested the movement's growth. Some critics called it idealistic, arguing it couldn't address systemic issues. Karoline had bristled at the skepticism, but Kennedy, ever steady, had shrugged it off. "Folks'll always doubt what they don't understand," he'd said, his drawl calm. "We just keep showing 'em." And they did. Charities reported spikes in donations, many with notes citing the film. Community centers hosted screenings, sparking local kindness campaigns. One letter from a veteran struck Karoline deeply. He'd volunteered at a shelter after years of isolation, inspired by Kennedy's quiet courage. "I thought kindness was for others," he wrote. "You showed me I could give it too." Kennedy read the letter, his eyes glistening, and murmured, "That's worth more than any vote I've ever won." The movement was no longer theirs alone. It belonged to the world, a tapestry of small acts, weaving together to form something enduring. At a gala honoring the initiative, the auditorium brimmed with supporters, their wristbands a quiet symbol of unity. Kennedy took the stage, his presence grounding his voice steady as he spoke of the flight that started it all. "One seat. One moment. That's all it took," he said, gesturing to Karoline, who stood beside him, her smile radiant. "This young woman reminded me that kindness isn't just a choice. It's a responsibility." The crowd roared, and Karoline stepped forward, her voice clear and heartfelt. "We all have the power to change lives," she said. "It starts with one act, one moment, and it grows because we choose to keep it going." The applause was thunderous, and as they stepped off the stage, a young girl approached clutching a wristband. "I helped my neighbor with her garden," she said shyly. Kennedy knelt, his eyes warm. "You're the real hero here," he told her, and the girl beamed her small act a spark in the movement's flame. The gala ended, but the energy lingered, a quiet promise of what was to come. Kennedy and Karoline stood outside the city's hum, a backdrop to their shared silence. "Think we've done enough?" Karoline asked, her voice soft. Kennedy's eyes twinkled. "It's not about enough. It's about starting something that lives on." His words carried the weight of a lesson, one the documentary had etched into countless hearts. Kindness, no matter how small, could change the world. It was a call to action, a reminder that every person could be a catalyst for good. As they parted, Kennedy glanced at his wristband, a symbol of the journey they'd begun. Karoline felt it too, a sense that their work had planted seeds that would grow for generations. The film, the movement, the stories, they were proof that one act could ripple outward, touching lives in ways no one could predict. And as the city lights glowed, Kennedy and Karoline knew the story of kindness was just beginning. Lesson learned. The power of a single act of kindness lies in its ability to inspire others, creating a ripple effect that transforms communities and lives. Every person, no matter their role or status, has the responsibility to choose compassion, fostering a world where empathy and generosity thrive.